So besides the cinched version of making a double layer beanie hat, there's also what's called an X closure or a 4-point closure. And I will show how I do both of these. Now, one thing that I noticed when I made these beanie hats is this cinched version, he's a 120 rows. But as you can see, when I fold up the brim, they're all about the same length. So this gray one is also 120 rows, but because of the way you sew it up at the top, it makes the overall hat shorter. And so this peach one that I did it 140 rows. So I'm able to fold up a brim. And also something to keep in mind is when you do the cinched version, it seems to give more stretch to a hat, where this one, since you sew it, it tapers up. So that's just a couple things to think about, but you can do these closures for both knitting and if you're crocheting, which is really nice and just makes it for a fun, different project. So to get started with your cast on, you're going to start with waste yarn, which is a contrasting color to your project yarn, but in a similar weight. And you go over and under each needle one time around. And you want a contrasting color, that's so you can see the stitches to your project when we go to sew up the hat. That will come into play later. Once we're one time around, you're going to put it down into your yarn holder, and I like to do between 5 and 7 rows of waste yarn. Once we get back, do between 5 and 7 rows. We're going to end at our white needle, which is the 48th needle, and I put the yarn on the inside of the machine on the left side of the needle, and now we're going to add our project yarn. Make sure you're going to leave a long tail. We're going to need that to sew up the hat. And I put it again on the left side of the needle, and I put my yarn in a bowl on the floor, and that's what helps with keeping my tension and not getting tucked or drop stitches as much. So once we start our project rows, this is now one row, and we're going to do between that 120 to 140 rows of our project yarn. Once completed and we've done all of our rows, and I'm back at my white needle, I put the project yarn on the left side of the white needle in the middle of the machine, and now we're going to add on again more waste yarn. If you also wanted to do the Ravel Cord waste yarn cast on, I'll put that link in the bottom of the video description. And we do between 5 and 7 rows, let the yarn run out, and then you crank it around twice and it will just fall off the machine. Now we're going to do a double layer again for our hat. And so we have the knit side facing out, and we want to get both tubes on the same side. So we're going to double it over and having both tubes on the right side. And then you want to make sure that the tail ends of the waste yarn and the project yarn line up so our fabric isn't twisted on the inside or the outside layer. So you want to kind of straighten that up and to make sure there's no twist so the beanie hat sits nicely on your head. Once you have the tail ends lined up, we're going to take the first stitch on both of our tubes, and we're going to put them on a crochet hook to slip stitch them together. And this creates a nice finished edge for us to work with to finish our hat. So this is my crochet hook, and I'm going to zoom in here. I have my tail ends of my yarn lined up for the waste yarn and my project yarn. And so we're looking here at the purl side or the inside, and you can see the cream is our waste yarn and the silver or the gray is our project yarn. So sandwiched in between the cream yarn is our first row, and that's the live stitches of our project yarn. So that's the yarn we're going to pick up on both sides, is that first gray piece that's between the waste yarn color. And so I put the one stitch on my crochet hook of the gray, and then the other one is the first stitch right after my tail ends of my waste yarn or my project tail end right here. And then now we slip in the left stitch through the right stitch, and that is our first slip stitch. Now we take up our next stitch on the right and slip it through, take up the left stitch on our crochet hook and slip that through. And we're going to go back and forth all the way around till we get back to the front of our project. And you want to take your time when doing this to make sure you're picking up all the stitches, because once we remove our waste yarn, if we missed one, it can unravel, which I ended up doing. I didn't pick one up, and I'll show you how you can fix it in this instance if you do that. But before you remove your waste yarn, just look at all your stitches and see if there is a hole. If there is, just undo your slip stitches, go back and forth and pick up that stitch and redo it. It's a lot easier. So once we get back to where there's no more stitches left to pick up, we're just going to take the tail ends of our project yarn and slip it through the last stitch to close it and lock the stitches into place. And so now you can remove your waste yarn. And you can do this with the Ravel Cord cast on. I have the video link down in the video description on how to do that. Or I also have another link on how to remove your waste yarn without cutting it out of your project as well, if you want to check that out. But both ways, you can do either way you'd like to. And then I tie the tail ends of the project yarn together to make a knot to secure them. To make the X closure or the 4-point closure, we take the side that we just slip stitched together and we make an X shape like so. And you'll see I put a stitch marker to where I missed one of those stitches. So we're going to take one of the tail ends of our project yarn, and now we're going to sew back and forth between all 4 layers of our hat. And then I'm going to make sure to pick up that last stitch that I missed with my tail end of my project yarn to secure it into place. So this is kind of a nice little cheat when you're closing the hat if you've missed one of those stitches. So I just make sure I sew through there, and then I go back again. I go twice, once to the outside, and then I sew again back to the inside. Once I get back to the middle, I'm going to put my yarn on the other tail end, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sew through all 4 layers of the beanie hat to the outside and then back into the middle. And then before you weave in any of your tail end of your yarn, flip the beanie hat right side out and see if that's how you like it. You can always flip it back over and kind of tuck in your sides, and you could sew a little bit more if you need to either even it up or you want to make that X shape a little bit more tight. So here's how it kind of looks when you just hold it to make this X shape. So I kind of get a nice horizontal line and then 4 points to the outside. Another way I have found I like to do it a little bit better to make a really tight X shape is you take your needle with the tail end of your working yarn in the middle, and I tie it down into a knot to hold this part into place. And then I fold in my side all the way, and then I take that needle again with the tail end of the working yarn. And once I have it folded and it's even on both sides, I put it through that side as well. And that kind of holds in that middle. And then I take the other tail end, put it on my needle, and fold in the other side. Make sure it's even. And sometimes it helps if you fold it all the way down to the bottom, and then put the tail end right in the middle, and then knot it all together. And now you have a really tight X closure in the middle, and it makes it a little bit easier to hold when you start to sew in through all 4 layers. So now that I have all 4 layers done and secured into place, now we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to sew back and forth to the outside, and then sew back into the middle, and then do the opposite side. Now doing this does give it more of a taper. So again, for a larger circumference head, that might be something where maybe you don't want to do the 4-point or the X point closure, but the cinched version might be a little bit better. So here's the tighter version of how to do it, so you can do it either way. I think both look really nice. Once I have it closed, I'm going to put it back inside out, and I'm going to knot my tail ends of my working yarn a few times to secure them into place. Then I put them on my needle, and I put it through 1 layer of the beanie hat, and then I pull it out, and then you can kind of pull down tightly and cut off any excess, and they'll kind of just disappear in between the 2 layers. And so now your closure is complete and you have your beanie hat. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and follow for more free tutorials. Happy crafting, everyone!